Not for her. For me. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. Let me back up just slightly, because context matters here, though not as much as you'd think. I was 26 at the time. She was Isadora, 28, with a marketing director title at a company she joined just before we met, a carefully curated social circle, and an apartment in Tribeca that her parents had helped her furnish. We'd been together for almost 2 years. 2 years of dinners out, weekends upstate, inside jokes that used to make her laugh so hard her eyes watered. 2 years of thinking I knew where things were going. I didn't realize it then, but the ending had been arriving slowly for months. I just wasn't looking for it. See, things had been tense between us for a while. Not explosively, not dramatically, just quietly strained, the way old wood gets before it finally cracks. Isadora had started making comments. Small ones, at first. You really should be further along by now. My coworkers your age all have their own place. Don't you have a plan? I did have a plan. A real one. But plans aren't always visible on the surface. And Isadora had very little patience for anything that wasn't already visible. I was working 2 jobs at the time, one in logistics coordination during the day and one freelancing at night, building a small consulting practice in operations management that I'd been quietly developing for about 8 months. Nobody knew about the second one. Not really. I didn't talk about things until they were real. That was always my way. But she interpreted my silence as stagnation, my focus as avoidance, my patience as weakness. And I let her. That's the part that still sits with me. I let her read me wrong because I thought she'd eventually see it on her own. She didn't. The first real warning came at a dinner party at her friend Rosalind's apartment on the Upper West Side. 8 people around a table. Wine. Charcuterie boards. And the kind of low-grade professional comparison that gets dressed up as casual conversation. Someone asked me what I was working on. I gave my usual short answer. Still building something on the logistics side. Consulting work, mostly operational efficiency for mid-sized companies. Polite nods. Then the subject shifted. Later that night, in the car home, Isadora sat with her arms crossed against the window. You make yourself sound so small, she said quietly. I glanced over. I was being accurate. You were being modest to the point of invisible. I didn't respond. She turned back to the window, and I should have paid more attention to that moment, because it told me something important that I wasn't ready to hear yet. She wasn't embarrassed by what I was doing. She was embarrassed by how I talked about it. And underneath that, she was embarrassed to be associated with someone who didn't perform ambition loudly enough for her social world to register it. But I filed it away and kept moving. That was my second mistake. The second warning was subtler, and it hit harder. We were walking through Prospect Park on a Sunday morning. Good weather. Coffee in hand. The kind of morning that used to feel effortless between us. And she said, out of nowhere, Corwin just got promoted to VP. Corwin was a guy she'd gone on 3 dates with before we met. I knew the name. I said, good for him. She nodded slowly. He just always had this energy. Like he knew exactly where he was going. I kept walking. I'm sure he did. She looked over at me. Don't you want that? That clarity? That certainty? I stopped walking. I looked at her. I have it, I said. She tilted her head. Do you? And the thing is, she wasn't trying to be cruel. That's what made it worse. She genuinely wasn't sure. She'd been with me for almost 2 years, and she genuinely wasn't sure whether I knew what I wanted from my own life. I should have opened up right there. I should have told her everything. The late nights. The contracts I'd closed. The email I'd gotten 2 days earlier from a company in Lower Manhattan asking me to come in and discuss a full operational overhaul. But I didn't. Because some part of me, some quiet, stubborn, protective part, didn't want to have to prove myself to the person who was supposed to believe in me without the evidence. I know now that relationships don't work on faith alone. I know that. But at 26, standing in Prospect Park with the woman I thought I loved, I didn't. So I said nothing. And she kept walking. The third warning wasn't a warning at all. It was a conversation that should have been a conversation but turned into something else entirely. We were at home. A Tuesday. She'd had a bad day at work. Some campaign had underperformed. Her boss had made her feel small in a meeting, and she'd come home carrying that particular brand of frustration that needed somewhere to land. It landed on me. You don't push yourself, she said. Not loudly. Almost thoughtfully, like she was arriving at a conclusion she'd been building toward for weeks. I work 14-hour days, I said. I know. But working hard and going somewhere aren't the same thing. I looked at her. Where do you think I should be going? She paused. I just expected more by now. From us. From you. More what? She set down her phone. More everything. More security. More presence. More confidence in where this is all heading. I sat very still. And where do you want it heading, Isadora? She looked at me. Not cold. Not angry. Just honestly. I'm not sure anymore, she said. That sentence hung in the room for a long time. Neither of us picked it up. We went to sleep that night without resolving anything. And I didn't realize then that there was nothing left to resolve. 3 weeks later was when she said it. The kitchen. The cold coffee. I think I need someone more experienced in life. And this time I understood that she wasn't talking about age or years or career stage. She was talking about performance. She wanted someone who had already arrived at the destination she was headed toward, someone she could stand beside and feel like she was already winning. She wanted a finished product. And I was still, in her eyes, a work in progress. She wasn't wrong that I was still building. She was wrong about what that meant. But I didn't say that. I said, okay. I helped her move her things out over the course of a weekend. She cried a little. I didn't. Not because I wasn't feeling anything, but because crying requires believing something is being lost forever. And I, for reasons I couldn't fully explain at the time, didn't believe that. I believed something was starting. She left on a Sunday. By Monday morning, something strange had happened inside me. It wasn't grief. It wasn't anger. It was something colder and cleaner than both of those. It was clarity. Not the performed kind she wanted to see in me. The actual kind, the kind that comes after a wound cauterizes. I sat at my kitchen table for about 40 minutes that morning. Just quiet. No music. No phone. And I made a decision. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind. A real decision. A quiet one. I decided to stop thinking about what I looked like from the outside. I was going to build what I was building, the way I was building it, without narrating the process to anyone who needed proof. I need to tell you what happened over the next several months. What took you so long? I didn't have a good answer. He knew why. He'd been watching. He'd seen how much energy I'd been spending managing Isadora's perception of me instead of just building the thing I was building. He didn't say that. He's not the type. But I knew he knew. I left my logistics job in early spring. 6 weeks later, I signed my third enterprise-level consulting contract, a company on the 42nd floor of a midtown building, retaining me for a 6-month operational review. My name was on a retainer agreement. My rates had more than doubled. I hired my first contractor, a logistics analyst named Calderon, who I'd worked with briefly years earlier and trusted completely. I moved apartments. Not because I needed to perform success. Because I could, and because the old place had started to feel like a museum of a person I was done being. The new place was in Williamsburg. Quiet building. Good light. I could see the skyline from the kitchen. I stood there the first morning in that apartment, coffee in hand. Same ritual, different life, and I thought about the last time I'd held a mug in a kitchen while my world shifted. The difference was that this time I was smiling. I should tell you about Leander. Leander was a client, or technically, his company was a client. But Leander himself became something more like a mentor, which was unexpected and genuinely changed how I thought about building a career. He was 51, had built and sold 2 companies, now ran a consultancy of his own, and seemed to exist in a state of permanent, unruffled calm. He told me something in our second meeting that stuck with me for the rest of the year. We were talking about pacing, about how to scale without losing quality. And he leaned back in his chair and said, "The people who try to look successful are always 5 years behind the people who just quietly become it." I wrote that down, not because it was profound in some abstract philosophical sense, but because it described, with surgical precision, everything I'd been living through. I kept building. Quietly. Summer came. I started working out seriously again, something I'd let slip during the relationship. Not to change how I looked. To reset how I felt. There's a difference. One is performance. One is maintenance. I was doing the maintenance. I slept better. I thought clearer. I was reading again. 3 books that month alone, which sounds small but felt enormous compared to the mental fog I'd been living in. I had dinner with Whitlock one evening in early July. He studied me across the table. "You look different," he said. "Tired?" I asked. He shook his head. "Present," he said. That was the word. Not polished. Not arrived. Present. Like I was actually occupying my own life instead of performing it for an audience. I thought about Isadora. I wondered if she'd found what she was looking for. I didn't feel bitterness about it. Just a quiet, honest curiosity. The way you think about a chapter you've already closed. I need to tell you about Avellini, because otherwise the re-encounter with Isadora won't make complete sense. Avellini was a graphic designer I met through Calderon in late June. Sharp, a little guarded at first, and funny in a way that snuck up on you. She wasn't looking for someone who'd already arrived. She was interested in people who were genuinely in motion. We started seeing each other casually. No pressure. No performance. Just two people who actually liked each other's company. I told her about the consulting work. Not as a pitch. As a story, a real one. She asked good questions. Not evaluating questions. Curious ones. There's a huge difference between the two, and if you've ever felt the contrast, you know exactly what I mean. She was there the day I signed my 4th contract. We celebrated with sushi and a walk across the bridge. She reached for my hand on the bridge without making a thing of it. It was small. It was everything. Now, the encounter. The reason I'm telling this whole story. And I heard my name. It was Isadora. She was with 2 women I didn't recognize. She'd seen me before I'd seen her. That was obvious from the way she was already mid-recovery, already adjusting her posture, already composing her expression. I stopped. She came over, leaving her friends a few steps behind. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said. That was the whole first exchange. She looked at me, and something moved across her face that I hadn't expected. Not recognition exactly. Something more complicated. Recalibration. We stood on that sidewalk for maybe 20 minutes. Her friends drifted to look at a shop window. They were being polite. "You look good," she said. "Thanks. I mean, you look really different." I didn't help her out. I just waited. "Are you still doing the consulting thing?" "The consulting thing." I filed that word choice away. "Yes," I said. "It's going well." "Very." She nodded slowly. Her eyes were doing that scanning thing, reading me for information. "Are you still at the same place?" I told her I'd moved. "Where to?" I told her. She looked genuinely surprised. Williamsburg wasn't Tribeca, but it wasn't nothing either. And I'd chosen it myself, which already made it different from every place she'd ever lived. I meant it. No score settling. "I've been thinking about that last conversation we had," she said suddenly. I waited. I think I was unfair. "You were honest," I said. She shook her head slightly. I was impatient. I mistook patience for stagnation. I didn't see the difference. I looked at her. Not coldly. Not warmly, either. Just honestly. "I wasn't great at communicating what I was building," I said. "No," she agreed. "But I also wasn't asking the right questions. I was looking for signals I already knew how to read. And you were speaking a different language." That was the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard her say. It landed quietly. Her friends came back. Brief introductions. Polite smiles. One of them looked between us with the practiced discretion of someone who's been filled in on backstory. Isadora turned back to me one more time. "Are you happy?" she asked. And I didn't pause for effect. I didn't think about it. I just said, "Yeah, I am." She smiled. Not fake. Actually genuine. A little sad around the edges. "Good," she said. She meant it. That's the thing. She genuinely meant it. We said goodbye the way 2 people do when they've traveled a long distance together and arrived at completely different destinations and both somehow understand that. No drama. No, let's get coffee sometime. Just a nod. A real one. She turned and walked back to her friends. I stood there for a moment. Not frozen. Not processing some grand emotional reckoning. Just standing on a Soho sidewalk at sunset, jacket over my arm, genuinely okay. And then I kept walking. I thought about her a lot over the next few days. Not with longing. Not with bitterness. But with something that felt more like gratitude, which surprised me, honestly. Because gratitude towards someone who left you doesn't come naturally. It takes a particular kind of distance. Here's what I was grateful for. She left before I had the chance to get comfortable. She left before I had the chance to slow down to a pace that made her comfortable instead of a pace that actually served where I was trying to go. And now she knew. Avellini asked me about it a few days later. I'd mentioned the run-in briefly. She looked at me with that calm, direct gaze she has. "Are you okay?" "More than okay," I said. "Do you still have feelings for her?" I thought about it honestly. "I have feelings about that whole time in my life," I said. "Not specifically about her. The time is what it was. She was part of it. But she's not. Unfinished business. She's just part of the story." Avellini nodded. "That's a healthy thing to say." I'm a work in progress, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Was that a reference to something? Something someone said once, I said. She wasn't wrong. She just didn't know what that meant. Avellini looked at me for a moment. Then she said, I think most people are works in progress. The interesting ones, anyway. I picked up my coffee. That's the most accurate thing I've heard in months, I said. She smiled. And that was that. I want to talk about something that doesn't get addressed enough in these kinds of stories. The self-examination part. Because it's easy to frame this whole thing as she underestimated me, and then she got to watch me succeed. That's the clean version. The version that plays well. But the actual version is messier. Because I wasn't perfect in that relationship either. I was so protective of what I was building that I never let her inside of it. I treated my ambitions like classified information, as if sharing them before they were proven would jinx them or somehow diminish them. That's not healthy communication. That's not partnership. That's a person moving through a relationship with their most important parts locked behind a door marked, not ready. Isadora needed someone who would let her in. Not someone who performed confidence, but someone who actually shared it. I wasn't doing that. I was quiet in a way that read as opaque. And she filled that opacity with her own doubts. I can't blame her for that entirely. When you don't give someone the truth, they construct their own version. Hers just happened to be one where I wasn't going anywhere. She was wrong. But I handed her the materials to build that conclusion. That's on me. What I've learned, and I mean genuinely learned, not just articulated, is this. Silence isn't the same as strength. Waiting to share something until it's finished isn't modesty. Sometimes it's fear. Fear that if you say what you're building out loud and it doesn't work, you'll have failed publicly. Fear that the person you love will look at the blueprint and decide it's not impressive enough, so you'd rather they not see it at all. That's not confidence. That's armor. And armor is exhausting to maintain. It's also lonely. I'd been lonely in that relationship without fully admitting it to myself. Not the kind of lonely that comes from being alone. The kind that comes from being surrounded by someone who doesn't actually know you. By October, the consulting business had evolved into something I still find slightly surreal to describe. 3 enterprise-level contracts running simultaneously. Calderon full-time. A second contractor brought on part-time. I'd been asked to speak at a small industry conference in November. Nothing enormous, 200 people in a midtown hotel ballroom. But it was real. My name on a program. My ideas given an hour. Whitlock came. He sat in the 3rd row and didn't say anything afterward for a long moment. Then, you should have done this 2 years ago. I wasn't ready 2 years ago, I said. He shook his head. You were ready. You just didn't know it yet. Maybe. Or maybe the timing was exactly right, and the path had to go through exactly what it went through. I choose to believe that. Not because it's comforting. Because it makes more sense when I look at the full sequence of events. I talked to Leander again around that time. We'd stayed in loose contact after the contract wrapped. He asked how things were going. I told him. He nodded slowly. You know what the interesting thing about growth is? He said. I waited. You can't see it while it's happening. You only see it in the moments when you walk past where you used to be and realize you can't fit back into it. I thought about that kitchen. The cold coffee. Okay, I said out loud. He raised an eyebrow. What? Nothing, I said. Just thinking about a word. Avellini and I made things official in November. There was no big announcement. No conversation that started with, so, what are we? It was that simple. That clean. The way things feel when they're not being forced into a shape they don't naturally hold. I took her to dinner the following weekend. A place in West Village that she'd mentioned once, 3 months earlier, and I'd remembered. She noticed that I'd remembered. She didn't make a big deal of it. But I saw it register. Small things. They matter more than people say. Around this time, I ran into Rosalind. You'll remember her from the dinner party. The one on the Upper West Side where Isadora told me I made myself sound small. Rosalind and I had always gotten along fine. She was never cruel, just very much a product of her social circle, evaluative in that reflexive, unconscious way. She saw me on a Saturday in the West Village, near the restaurant. Different context. Different version of me. She literally stopped walking. You look incredible, she said. And she was talking about more than the physical. I could tell. Thanks, Rosalind. You look well. She studied me. Are you still with Isadora? No. That ended a while back. She nodded. Paused. She mentioned running into you. I said nothing. She said you seemed different. I smiled. I am different. Rosalind looked at me for a moment. Not different, she said, surprising me. I think she meant more fully yourself. That landed differently than I expected. More fully yourself. Like I'd been operating at partial capacity before and had finally found the rest of the switches. Maybe that's exactly what had happened. I don't want to make this story into something it isn't. It isn't a revenge fantasy. It isn't a cautionary tale about women who don't see value in men. It's more specific than that. It's about the particular danger of letting someone else's impatience become your self-doubt. It's about the quiet cost of protecting your ambitions so fiercely that even the people closest to you can't see them. And it's about what happens when those two things collide. When someone's impatience meets your opacity and produces a conclusion that neither of you fully chose, but both of you built together. Isadora and I were a bad fit. Not because she was terrible, not because I was without fault, but because her way of measuring progress and my way of making progress were fundamentally mismatched. She needed visible markers, check-ins, signposts. I worked underground. And underground work, no matter how good it is, looks like nothing from the surface. The last thing I want to tell you about is something that happened in December, about 10 months after Isadora left. I was at a fundraiser, the kind of event I'd never been to 2 years earlier and now attended for professional reasons. A hotel in Midtown. Open bar. The low hum of people performing their own success at various volumes. I was talking with a client when I noticed someone across the room. Isadora. Again. This city is sometimes absurdly small. She was with a group. She saw me at the same moment. This time she smiled first. I nodded. Later in the evening, we ended up near each other at the bar. Neither of us made a production of it. Twice in 4 months, she said. New York, I said. She smiled. Looked down at her drink briefly. I want to say something, she said. You don't have to. I know. I want to. I waited. I was wrong, she said. Not about us not working. I think that was probably right. But about the reason. I told you it was about experience. About you not being ready enough. And I was wrong about that. I was measuring you against a version of what I thought readiness should look like. And I couldn't see past my own metric. I looked at her. It took me a while, I said, to see my part in it. I wasn't transparent. I let you fill in blanks I should have filled myself. She nodded. Yeah. We stood there for a moment. Not romantically. Not with any unfinished longing. Just two adults being honest with each other on the back end of something they'd both gotten partly wrong. Are you happy? She asked again. Same question as September. Still yes, I said. She raised her glass slightly. Good, she said. I am too. I believed her. I raised mine back. And that was it. That was the end of that chapter. Not with a fight. Not with a dramatic exit. Just two people touching the edge of a closed door and both turning back toward the rooms they'd built for themselves. Here is the thing about growth that nobody warns you about. It isn't the achievement that changes you. It's the quiet that comes after you stop performing for an audience that was never going to clap. The moment I stopped trying to make Isadora see me, and I mean the exact moment, that Sunday after she left, sitting at the kitchen table for 40 silent minutes, that was the real beginning. Not because I suddenly became someone new, but because I stopped spending energy managing how I was being perceived and redirected it into the only thing that actually mattered, the work. And the work paid off. Not because the universe rewards the patient, but because patience, when it's backed by actual effort, tends to compound. It compresses into something eventually. And when it does, it tends to compress into something solid. Something you didn't have to borrow or perform. Something you just became. One more thing. This one is for anyone who is still in the part of the story that I was in before that Sunday morning. Still in the relationship where someone's doubt about you has started quietly becoming your own doubt about yourself. Still holding the cold coffee. Still trying to figure out whether the right response is to fight harder or to finally just set the mug down. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Your situation isn't mine. Your person isn't Isadora. But I will say this. If someone's vision of who you are is so far from who you actually are, not who you want to be, but who you genuinely already are underneath the building, then no amount of explanation is going to fix that gap. You can't talk someone into seeing you. You can only show them. And sometimes showing them requires leaving the room they've put you in. Not to prove something. To breathe. To build. To become the thing you were already quietly in the process of becoming before someone else's impatience turned it into a question mark. The consulting firm just took on its 5th enterprise client last month. Calderon is full-time now, with equity. The conference talk led to a second one. Avellini came to the second one. She sat in the second row. She didn't look at me the way someone looks at a thing they're evaluating. She looked at me the way someone looks at a person they already know. There's a difference. It's the biggest difference there is. After that December fundraiser, I walked home. All the way from Midtown to Williamsburg. 2 hours. Cold. Good cold. The kind that makes the city feel like it's alive. I thought about everything. The kitchen. The coffee. The okay. The 40 silent minutes at the table. The contracts. The conference. The bridge walk with Avellini. The September sidewalk. The December bar. And I thought about what Rosalind had said. More fully yourself. I rolled that phrase over in my head for about a block and a half. Then I let it go. Not because it wasn't true. Because it no longer needed thinking about. It had stopped being a thing to arrive at and become a thing I was already living inside of. That's how you know. Not when other people see it. When you stop needing them to. I crossed the bridge just before midnight. The skyline behind me. My apartment ahead. The city doing that thing it does at night. Humming quietly at a frequency that sounds, if you're paying close enough attention, almost exactly like possibility. I didn't take a photo. I didn't document it. I just walked. And I was already home before I got there. She said I needed to be more experienced. She was right that I was still becoming. She was wrong that becoming wasn't enough.